and welcome to the Atlanta History Center's virtual author talk featuring Jennie Fields in conversation with Jessica Handler to discuss Jennie's new book, Atomic Love. I'm Kate Whitman, Vice President of Author Programs and Community Engagement for the History Center, and I'm glad you're joining us this evening. You can purchase copies of Atomic Love directly from our official book-selling partner, Acapella Books. There is a link to the book in the chat box, so you can see that to the right of your screen. As Jennie and Jessica are talking, please submit your questions via the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. Jessica will get to as many of them as time allows. And now to introduce our authors. Jennie Fields received an MFA from the Iowa Writers Workshop and is the author of the novels Lily Beach, Crossing Brooklyn Ferry, The Middle Ages, and The Age of Desire. A Chicago native, Fields was inspired by her own mother's work as a University of Chicago trained biochemist in the 1950s. After years as a creative director at a large New York ad agency, Fields now lives with her husband in Nashville, Tennessee. And interviewing her tonight is Jessica Handler. Jessica Handler is the author of the novel The Magnetic Girl, winner of the 2020 Southern Book Prize, a 2019 Books All Georgians Should Read, an Indie Next Pick, Wall Street Journal's Spring 2019 Pick, and Bitter Southerner's Summer 2019 Pick. Her other books include Invisible Sisters, a memoir, and Braving the Fire, a guide to writing about grief and loss. Her nonfiction has appeared on NPR, in Tin House, Drunken Boat, The Bitter Southerner, Brevity, Creative Nonfiction, Newsweek, The Washington Post, and More magazine. She teaches creative writing at Oglethorpe University in Atlanta and lectures internationally on writing. I'm so happy to have you both here tonight. Thank you very much. And Jessica, I will hand it over to you now.
Thank you, Kate. Let's see. Okay. So I'm going to go to full screen so I can see Jennie, and there she is. So Jennie, I'm sorry that we don't get to have champagne and clink our glasses like you were talking about just a minute ago.
Yeah. That
Welcome.
would have been a good way to start, but we'll have to do it virtually.
We'll do it virtually, and we'll do it in real life in the future. Welcome, and thank you so much for joining us in this new technology. I want to talk to you about a lot of things about Atomic Love. I loved the book, and I love historical fiction, and I love books like this one about women and challenges and choices. But the first thing I have to tell you that struck me is the regard ring. I want to talk about the regard ring. A thing I love about historical novels are these sort of odd things we learn that are true of a period. And there's so much terrific research in this book. Talk to us about the regard ring, what it stands for, R-E.
Well, so my main character, Rosalind, is obviously a nuclear physicist who had worked on the Manhattan Project, but she's lost her job. Now she's working at Marshall Field's department store in Chicago in the used and antique jewelry section. And so she's, like anybody who is a really accomplished person, she tries to do the best job she can. So she learns all about the antique jewelry she's selling. And one of the things she sells are regard rings, which are rings that have a ruby, emerald, garnet, amethyst, another ruby, and a diamond, and the first letter of each one spells regard. And it was something that was given to women by men in the Victorian and Edwardian era to say, I really, really like you. I wish I could marry you, but I can't. For whatever reason, maybe there was a wife, maybe, who knows why. And so Rosalind's really intrigued by the regard ring, because it's like, who would want to wear a sign of love from someone who they could never fully possess? And yet she's somewhat in the same situation.
Exactly. That's why I brought it up, because, I like jewelry, but really what you're doing here is so cleverly and early in the book. I mean, it's page 4 or 5. You're establishing the idea of Roz having regard for someone who has thrown her over, and for reasons that we discover, and also learning to have regard for herself and a better love. So tell us a little bit about Roz's circumstance and the 2 men in her life.
So Rosalind, when she was working on the Manhattan Project, fell in love with a colleague and had a passionate affair with him. And felt that everything was good. He was a British man who had come over to work on the Manhattan Project. But when the bomb dropped, and let me just say that a lot of people don't realize this, but a lot of the scientists who worked on the Manhattan Project never thought the bomb would be dropped because they really believed it was a deterrent. The reason they even worked on the bomb is they thought that the Germans were working on the same bomb. If we didn't have a bomb to stop them, it would be a disaster, that, they would just get rid of America altogether. So, they always thought it was a deterrent, a bargaining chip. And right before it was dropped, 71, I think it was, scientists signed the Lamarr petition, which was supposed to go to Harry S. Truman. And it was supposed to stop him from dropping the bomb, but he never got it because his Secretary of State didn't believe in it. So anyway, she was devastated when the bomb dropped. She got extremely depressed, found it hard to function. And then shortly after that, this man, Weaver, threw her over, just said couldn't see her anymore. And she was devastated. And just beyond that, he betrayed her by making a report that said she was mentally unstable. And so she lost her job, she lost her career, and she's working, like I said, in Marshall Field selling.
Yeah. And for those of us who aren't necessarily familiar with Chicago, Marshall Fields was, and perhaps still is, the flagship high-end department store in Chicago. Yeah.
It was. Sadly, it got bought by Macy's, and a lot of Chicagoans are very upset about that.
I did not know that. I haven't been to Chicago in about 5 years.
Or something, but.
Yeah, but it's also such a Chicago book too. And I haven't been there in probably 5 or 6 years, but you're just there. The way she looks out at the lake, just everything is so terrific. There's a lot in this book, throughout this book, about women and failure and what makes success, and how women like Roz assess what makes them successful. And she observes, for example, Roz has a sister, Louisa, who essentially raised her, right? And she says, or you have her say, that Louisa only loves me when I've failed. Tell us a little bit about what you're doing in this book about women and their roles post-World War II, and how women of that era, what they were challenged with. Do I work? Do I marry?
Yeah, it was, I really wanted to write about that era because, the interesting thing was that people, when the war was over, everybody wanted to be happy. It had been such an unhappy time, and there was deprivation even at home. But the funny thing is, it was, in some ways, there were a lot of scars underneath that happiness. The men came back with PTSD and had horrible experiences, and the women who had found joy in doing jobs that were important, and who had, really succeeded in ways they never imagined during the war, doing jobs that had not been available to them before, were basically often kicked out of their jobs when the men came home, and they said, well, the man really needs that job. And if you marry, you can't work. You're not supposed to work. If you marry, you're supposed to have babies. And so, it was something that they felt a deep sadness they couldn't even talk about, because it wasn't on the agenda. You're supposed to be happy now. Yeah. So I have portrayed a number of women in the book who have, either never had a chance to have that kind of job, which would be Charlie's sister, but always wanted to do more and is very bright and capable. And then Louisa, who is Rosalind's sister, had this chance to really make a difference during the war in this torpedo factory because she was so bright. And then she loses her job, and so she's angry, and she's just holding that anger in, and it affects all her relationships. It poisons her marriage, and it's sad that these women had to face such a thing. So
you do a wonderful job, and a really complex, empathetic job in this book, looking at different women and who are approximately the same age. I get the impression that, Louisa's a little older, well, somewhat older than Roz, but then Charlie's sister, her name is Peggy, right?
Right.
They're all dealing with this post-war setback, if you will. I like how you said, we're all supposed to be happy, but there's losses in that happiness.
Yeah.
How they deal with it and how they move forward, sometimes with anger. Also, Linda, Charlie's first girlfriend.
Right.
Yeah. You were talking about PTSD. Tell us a little bit about Charlie.
So Charlie is an FBI agent, and he's a man who was captured fairly early in the war and spent literally years in a Japanese prisoner of war camp.
Mhm.
And he has suffered horribly. I mean, what he had to go through and still hold on to who he was as a human being uh, affects everything he does all the time. And he not only has PTSD, but he also lost the use of one of his hands. And so he has this horrible feeling that he's not entirely in life, and he keeps people away from him to some degree. And yet he's very drawn to Rosalind because she too is damaged.
Yeah.
And so it's I always thought of those two as two birds with broken wings who find each other. And you know, and I have this belief that love is not just something that makes you happy. Love is something that heals you. And if you're broken, love can be the most healing thing of all. And so I wanted to write about that and how they are drawn to each other.
Jenny, I just wrote down "Love heals you." I just wrote that on my notes. I'm like, yeah, that's good. I want to jump ahead to something that you and I've emailed about a little bit, because you and I both have written historical fiction. We both write historical fiction, but you make a very firm distinction, and I think an accurate distinction, about the difference between a biographical novel, historical fiction. So talk to us a little bit about what happened in this book, or the writing of this book, versus straight up biographical novel.
Right. So my last book was about Edith Wharton, and I felt, and she is my favorite author, bar none. I just love her.
Yeah.
And I felt it was really important to be true to her life story. And she had left diary after diary. This woman really did document her life. She sent love letters to her lover. I mean, I wrote about how at the age of 45, she had a sexual awakening and an affair,
Mm-hmm.
and how it changed her writing, everything. And I felt it was my duty to my responsibility to be honest about her. And sometimes it was painful, because when she fell in love, she became like a 16-year-old girl. It was embarrassing. And and it was painful for me to say that story, tell that story. And some people said, well, Edith Wharton would never have done that, but she did do that,
Yeah. You got that from her.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
So when I went to write this story, I wanted it to be my own characters, that I could tell a story I wanted to tell. And
Mm-hmm.
so one thing I did was I made sure that it was possible these characters could have existed. So there really was a young woman named Leona Woods, who was the only female on this portion of the Manhattan Project that created the first atomic nuclear reaction. She was a very important person on it. And she was the youngest member of the team, just like Rosalind. So I knew that was possible. And then there really was a man who they knew was an atomic spy at the University of Chicago, and they never caught him. He went on to live the rest of his life in England. He never was jailed, and they knew it for a fact, but they couldn't arrest him because they had found out, because they had broken a Russian code, and they could decode all their messages from Russia.
Yeah.
So they knew that he was the one, but they had to prove it otherwise in order to arrest him, and they never did. And in 1995, when all the information from that project, it was called the Venona Project, the breaking of the code, was released and declassified, there it was. This man was really an atomic spy. He had shared atomic secrets, but they never were able to catch him.
So his outcome is a little bit different than Weaver's.
And
I'm not going to give anything away.
Yes, but the point is, Weaver could exist at that time. He really could have been sharing secrets that people in that position had secrets to share.
So two things. I'm listening to you talk about this, and one of the things that I love when I talk with authors is we as authors get to know all kinds of stuff. We become walking containers of knowledge about whatever it is that's obsessed us for the past 5 years or however long. What inspired this book, and how did you do your research? Because your research is so good.
Thank you. A number of things went into my beginning this book. One was that my mother was a scientist. And so she was a biochemist doing important cancer research in the late 1940s. And sadly, when she married, they expected her to leave her job. And she had always told us that her name was on a very important cancer paper. And you wonder, is that apocryphal? Was she just like, so just 2 weeks ago, right before the book came out, a friend of mine did some research and said, your mother's cancer paper was really important, that at the time it was talked about everywhere, and that it, not only that, but it was still referred to in the 1960s, well into the 1960s.
Yeah.
So, here was a woman who was doing something really important, and then she was giving dinner parties and raising babies. And, she put science into everything she did, Yeah. She didn't just clean the floor, she mixed the chemical to clean the floor. She cooked as though she was a scientist,
Yeah.
And so she always told me that was the thing that broke her heart most, was that she had given up science, and that she said to me, don't ever give up your career when you marry. Hold on to what you do and who you are. And so I wanted to write about a female scientist at a time where scientists were rarely women. Mm-hmm. The other part of this story is that her best friend was her cousin, and they walked to the University of Chicago every day. And her best friend worked at a place called the Met Lab, and that was the metallurgical laboratory at the University of Chicago, and couldn't tell my mother anything about what she was doing. It drove my mother nuts. And she didn't tell her till years later she was working on the Manhattan Project.
Wow.
So she, I believe, was a clerical person with the Manhattan Project, but still the silence was very important. They just did not share any information. So that drew me into wanting to know more about it.
Oh, yeah. I want to interject and say that for the folks who have joined us, and I see the roster here, if you want to post a question in the Q&A, please do that. We'll take questions at the end, but I'm going to see them, so we might integrate them in as we talk. But yeah, type in some questions. We would love to hear from you. I know that. So Roz struggles, as your mother did, I'm presuming, with the attraction of domestic life to some extent. I love the scene, for example, where Roz wears Peggy's night clothes to sleep over at Charlie's, and she looks in the mirror and she sees an alternate self. She sees who she could be if. And then she goes to Charlie's basement apartment, and adult things happen. But yes. What are Roz's struggles with the attraction of domestic life?
Well, I wanted her to be realistic for the era. Yes. And, when you have an ideal being put out for you about being, a wife and mother, and it's just going to be wonderful and you're going to love it, you're going to want to know, is that who I am? Could I be that person? And as you know, Rosalind is a person who can't even cook anything. I mean, she likes to dump things out of cans. She's very different.
She's making a canned soup at one point, right?
Well, yeah. It's Chef Boyardee rabbit. That's right.
Yeah.
And she, that's pretty much what she does. She's not trained to. Her sisters tried to help her be an appropriate woman, and she doesn't want to be. And she's probably getting a lot of sense from her sister how miserable her life is doing just that. So, Rosalind is a complicated person, but she's also a person of her era, and I did not want it to be. I know a lot of people think, oh, she should have said, I'm not going to be that woman. I'm going to be a scientist. And in fact, there is a lot of that in there, but it also has this other side. And I think it's very important to be realistic for the era.
Because characters are complex.
Right.
They have to be. We have a question that's come in from Jessica McCarran. And she says, I loved the book, could not put it down. If you were casting characters in a movie version, who would you choose?
Well, I've been asked that question, and I can tell you that I imagine Charlie as Tom Hiddleston.
Oh, good.
But I don't know who Weaver is, and I don't know who Rosalind is, because Rosalind, for one thing, has very dark hair, and she's described as being Hedy Lamarr-like, and I don't know who that is these days. Who is a young actress who's got that kind of gravitas
Yeah.
and intelligence? And if you know of one, Jessica, write it into the chat, because I'd like
Yes.
to know.
Type it in. If Jessica McCarran, if you have an idea, I'll call it out. You bring up Hedy Lamarr, and you do mention Hedy Lamarr, but how many people reading this know sort of the sub information or the background information on Hedy Lamarr? You want to fill us in?
Well, she was a brilliant, brilliant physicist herself. And, it's because of Hedy Lamarr that I can talk to you right now, because she had something to do with how we've created the internet and how we communicate. And I don't really understand it because I'm not a physicist, but she was brilliant. She was beautiful, and she was brilliant.
And I think she holds a patent on something related to this technology, what became this technology.
Right.
The answer is Abigail Spencer. She met Hedy Lamarr in the show Timeless. I don't know who Abigail Spencer is, but clearly that's someone we're going to have to look up. Both Roz and Charlie have sisters in their lives who are kind of proxy parents in a way. Talk about that authorial choice, who Louisa is to Roz, who Peggy is to Charlie.
Well, I wanted Rosalind to be an orphan. It just was important to me that she was somebody who had experienced loss, and yet she has this family that has taken her on, which is her sister and brother-in-law, and her brother-in-law is just like so dear,
He's a sweetheart.
Yeah, he's so loving to her, and he has been like a father to her. Her own father, who did live until she was grown, it was complex, and actually based on my grandfather, to tell you the truth.
The county coroner, right?
Yeah, he was the coroner physician for Cook County. And he was one of the first people to begin forensic medicine. And he was really famous. When he died, 1,500 newspapers around the country ran his obituary. And I know this only recently from looking at newspapers.com. So he was an important man, but like Dr. Joe, I think he thought about himself mostly, And so anyway, she's been taken on by her sister and her brother-in-law, raised by them basically. And I wanted to have her relationship with Louisa to be complex and to be in some ways tortured, and that it's something she has to resolve. She has to acknowledge why is their relationship bad? Why is Louisa so difficult? And so that was fun for me to explore. And then I wanted Peggy to be somebody who is a ballast for somebody like Charlie, so damaged and really needs someone to care about him. I didn't want him to be all alone. And he lives in Peggy's basement. And and Peggy and Charlie are from a Polish family in a Polish neighborhood. There are more Poles in Chicago than anywhere outside of Warsaw. That includes other Polish towns. So it's just a huge Polish community, and I love that idea, and I wanted to bring that to life. So I love Peggy. She's a caring, good human being.
Yeah, I loved her. I loved Charlie. There's a little Polish in there. I don't speak Polish. Do you?
No, but I do have a friend who was a professor at Columbia University who translated it for me, and who even told the narrator of the audiobook how to say it, and he did it phonetically. It was really incredible, and I'm very grateful to Zan Holt, who did that.
I was very impressed. I mean, I don't speak Polish, but there was enough Polish there. Charlie is recognizing words and feeling comforted by his neighborhood. So I loved that. You've said in an interview that the Cold War era was a time of distrust and insecurity. I'm quoting you back to you there. Um, why does that tension pull you in as a writer, distrust and insecurity?
Why does that tension what?
Pull you in as a writer, a
Okay.
time of distrust and insecurity. What are you mining there?
Well, once again, this is a time when everyone was supposed to be happy. The war is over. We are not going to be, fighting another country. And yet, and this is very early in the Cold War, suddenly in 1949, the Russians got the bomb, and they got it way earlier than anybody thought because they had spies passing information out from Chicago and Los Alamos and other places. And so suddenly there was the sense that we're not all happy, we're not all secure. At any moment, we have an existential threat that could end everything we know. And I mean, to me, that adds tension and it adds intrigue, and it makes it so vital that Roz makes this decision to spy on her old lover and, find out, is he passing these secrets that could kill us all? And I'm not that old. I didn't live at that very period, but I did live later during the Cold War, and I remembered the terror of thinking, I'm not going to, my dad's in Chicago, working in Chicago. I lived in a suburb. If they're going to drop the atomic bomb, my dad won't get home in time to see me. I know we'll all die. And I thought about it all the time, and so did all of us.
All of us. Did you have to do duck and cover drills in elementary school? I did.
We didn't. We went to the basement where there were canned goods. And I remember looking at these towers of canned goods and thinking, how long have they been here? And are we really going to have to eat this? And honestly, all that duck and cover and all that gathering canned goods was absurd. We would all die if it happened.
If you sit in the hallway like this, you're still going to die. Yeah. And the canned goods, I also wondered, like, where's the can opener?
You just hope somebody had a Swiss Army.
Right, or a screwdriver and a hammer, to get in there. But that's a particular fallacy, I think, that was promoted late 50s, early mid 50s.
Well, it was to calm the populace, and but even early on, there were still duck and cover, and they didn't really know. But do you remember her sitting there listening to the TV and what they were telling people to do? Listen carefully, and this will help protect you. Well, I took that from a real film that came out that year, and that's what they were telling people because they were trying to calm the populace because people were really freaked out.
So tell us more about that. That's a scene where television is new in terms of most people's homes, and she is gifted a fancy television, and her niece, with whom she's very close, is over visiting, and she's a child, so she's all about, like, I'm going to turn on the TV and sit in front of it. So talk about this scene and what Roz sees and how you got that sound, that audio clip.
Well, so, Weaver gives her this television, and, everybody's been talking about television. She is very curious about it. Up till now, it's been the radio, and she wants to know about it. And I think that really pegged the era, and
it sure did.
And the fact that her niece knows more about what it means when there's like snow on the TV and what to do because her friends have TVs and she's seen them. And so then when her niece goes to bed and she's, feeling very, I think, motherly towards her niece and wanting to protect her. There's family strife at home, and she wants to comfort her niece, but she hears this horrible car crash out on Lakeshore Drive, and it really unsettles her, and she gets up and thinks, well, I'll see what's on television.
And I'll try this thing out. Yeah.
And, in those days there were 3 channels and you just click between the 3, and she turns it on and she finds this, film about what to do during atomic war. And, it was created by I can't even remember what the name of the department was for the country, but and it was, and I looked up what were they telling people, and I found this film, and I thought, I've got to just quote this word for word because it was so absurd.
The absurdity of it really we see it as absurd from here. But within the world of that scene, I mean, Roz knows it's absurd because she's a Manhattan Project scientist. She's not what might otherwise be called a civilian. So it sets up a really wonderful sense of irony and, again, tension, because we know that people are being fed a line about.
And not only that, but she feels horrific guilt.
Yeah. Throughout the book, she feels guilt.
Properly, did you say?
Throughout the book, she feels.
She feels guilt. And she feels, if it wasn't for me and what I did, the world would not be in this position. And it's very hard for her to live with this, especially when she thinks about her niece, whom she adores. Mm-hmm. And her niece stands for the future for her.
Right.
And the thought that her niece is going to live under this shadow that she created is very painful for her.
It's very difficult for her, right? Roz thinks of herself, at one point, she says to herself, once she was someone special. She thinks of herself, and I'm wondering, what makes a person special, and what does Roz need to know that she is still special?
Well, I think, when she was a scientist, she felt very appreciated for what she did. And like all very bright women from that era, as she was going through school, she was not appreciated by the people around her. They, especially the boys, she always felt as soon as anybody knew how brainy she was, they weren't interested in her anymore. But when she worked on the Manhattan Project, she was Enrico Fermi, who was the Nobel Prize winner,
right?
As was Leona Woods, and I based that on her. And she felt that she could make a difference in the world, and that mattered to her, like a lot of women during the war. But of course, even more expanded because of her ability to create things that had never been created. She said they were crossing this, expanse that no one had ever crossed before.
She's a pioneer.
Yeah, she was really a pioneer, and she believed that what really mattered was atomic energy. She believed in atomic energy and how it was going to free the world, instead of using fossil fuels. That interested her. So that made her feel special when she lost that, and suddenly she isn't making much money. She can barely pay her rent, and she's working at Marshall Field selling antique jewelry. She doesn't feel very special anymore.
Yeah.
But she's a person who hangs in there. She does her job.
She does hang in there. I got to tell you, I'm trying to figure out how to do this without giving it away. But there is a scene involving a perfume atomizer that I just, when I turned that page, or I guess digitally swiped that page, I went, oh, she did. Was just.
She's in peril and she uses it as a weapon.
Yeah. Yeah. As who wouldn't, right?
Right. Well,
it was gorgeous.
She doesn't have many choices. It's not like she's carrying a gun, nor do we want her to. So
right. It was a really wonderful use of environment and scene in that. It was terrific. A couple more questions. Talk to me about the poem at the end of the book.
Okay. So I found this poem and I found it very moving. And fascinating and complicated and brilliant. And it's something you experience rather than really understand. It's a very experiential poem. The visuals in this poem are just, to me, exquisite. Yeah. And I wanted to put it in the beginning of the book. And my editor really liked the poem as well, but she said, you know what? If people read this poem, they're going to think, oh, this book may not be for me. This is too complex. This is too deep. I don't know if I can handle this poem. Let's use the poem, but let's put it at the end.
At the back,
so that's why we put it there.
It was lovely, and it served to, it created a place to understand the decisions that Rosalind and Charlie make at the end. Again, I'm not giving anything away. You and I both write historical fiction, and I'm curious, what do you think makes good historical fiction resonate with contemporary readers? We don't live in the Chicago of that era, but.
But part of us wants to, part of us wants to live in different eras. And especially during this pandemic, when we're stuck in our houses and we can't go out and, I'm not on the book tour I thought I would be on.
Yeah.
I'm on this book tour. And so, we're all kind of longing to lose ourselves in an era maybe that's less upsetting than the era we live in now. We live in a pretty upsetting era. I really feel for my kids, and it's a heartbreaking era. So to go to another era and find out, oh, yeah, they had problems too, and how they resolved it, how they worked through it, and they lived until we are here. So I think there's something soothing about that, and certainly fascinating, and it's a chance to escape. And I think in an important way. So that as a writer, and I think you'll acknowledge this too, the important part is to absorb all the information and to not feel like you're spewing it out.
Right.
Bad historic fiction comes from people saying, and here's everything I know about the atomic bomb.
Yeah.
And here's what I know about fashion of the era, all on one page. That's just not the way it is, because you live in an era and you know what you know. You know that when you go downtown to Chicago to work on the hottest day of the year in Chicago, you still wear white gloves because that's what you do, and stockings and girdles, and you just take it for granted that you do what you do. And so I wanted it to be as natural as it could be, and yet get the facts right.
That's a very good way to put it, because I was thinking about how my students often ask me, how does one integrate information research into narrative so it doesn't feel like, as you put it, you're spewing, here's everything I know about the atomic bomb, ta-da. And I like what you say about how we know what we know, and it's just natural in our lives.
Right.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing to bear in mind. Yeah.
Definitely.
What haven't I asked you? There's got to be something that we haven't touched on that you're dying to tell us.
Oh dear.
Yeah.
What's it like to put a book out during a pandemic? How about
that? Tell us.
So, this book got a lot of excitement in the beginning. We sold it in a ton of countries. We have a lot of movie interest, and that's been terrific. And actually, I think it won't be a movie. I'm hoping it'll be a series. But at the same time, suddenly we have a pandemic. And so everything changes. And what my publisher told me was that the hard part is not that people aren't reading. In fact, people are reading more than ever. But they tend to read things they knew about before the pandemic. They're not finding out about new books as easily. So the thing to do is, please, make an effort to tell your friends about the book. If you read it and you like it, tell all your friends about it. Post about it. Don't give it 4.5 stars and then put it as 4 stars on, Goodreads. I mean, be generous and let people know about things you enjoyed, because it's the only way, word of mouth is the only way that new books are going to get read, discovered, and it's really, really important. It's a very hard time. I spent 5 years on this book. I've rewritten it 10 times, and I'm not kidding. That's not just a round number. I really did.
Yeah.
And, and it's kind of heartbreaking to think, oh, if people don't find it, that would be really sad. So I'm excited that it's done well in the first week, but I really would love to have more people read it. So if you like it, pass it around.
Spread the word. I absolutely agree with you. And another thing I would say is ask your independent bookstore, even if you physically can't go into, in your case, Parnassus, in our case, Acapella is handling the book sales for this. Email them, ask them what's good, what do I like, and they'll help you. Right?
And they're thrilled to help you. And then drop it in your trunk if that's what you want. You don't have to walk into a bookstore. But when you don't walk into a bookstore, the problem is you don't see the new books. And so asking your bookseller, what do you believe in? Any bookstore, they should know the answer. And what have you heard about that's new that I might enjoy?
That I might like. Absolutely. We have a question. from someone who's called Anonymous. It's, I think it's just, I don't know. It's interesting that we're now living in a time where more information has made us doubt science more. How do you think belief or faith in science compares between the two eras and us as a population? Lovely question.
Great question, and that's one I'm thrilled to answer, because that era that I'm writing about, science was king. And one of the reasons it was king was because in 1949, Jonas Salk invented the polio vaccine, and children were dying. They were, in, iron lungs.
Iron lungs.
They were wearing braces, and nobody knew if they could stop it. It was really, really as terrifying as our pandemic is now, and he solved it. And everybody was safe again, and science was so revered. And I don't know if you remember this, but there was a logo or a slogan from the era, and it was "Better Living Through Chemistry."
Yes.
And, they believed that chemistry would solve all our problems. And, weirdly, of course, it sort of ended up in our food too, because, like women of that era were eating, bologna rarebit and things like that made out of bologna and Velveeta. But,
Yeah.
And then my mother always thought, well, if this is a new thing, we should try it, But they believed in science. They believed science could save us. And Rosalind, if she lived now, would be so perplexed by people who don't believe in science. The whole point of science is that it grows. If they didn't know we should wear masks in the beginning, they know it now. So pay attention. And it's just really important that we don't poo-poo things, because it's not a solid answer. It's something that they're constantly learning. So, yeah, that's a great question, Anonymous, whoever you are. Thank you asking that question.
Yeah, it's a really interesting question, because I appreciate that. Yeah, absolutely. And that science, and Rosalind looks up to science. Science is what defines her as a person, as a woman, and defines the choices she makes professionally and personally as well.
Absolutely.
I do remember Better Living Through Chemistry. Absolutely. There was, let's see, I don't want to give anything away, but let's see, what do I want to ask you? Atomic energy, you did a great job tying that into the power of love. You want to tell us about that?
Well, the title, Atomic Love, some people have told me on Goodreads that it's cheesy and they were embarrassed to read a book called Atomic Love in the doctor's office. And I'm wondering what they're doing at a doctor's office during a pandemic. I'm worried about them. But
there you go. That's the bigger issue. Yeah.
Yeah. But, when I looked up the word atom, the atom, it comes from the Greek for atomos is the Greek. And it means indivisible, because they believe the atom could not be divided. And so to me, atomic love is people who their love is so strong they cannot be divided. And at the same time, the irony of the fact is, what is Rosalind doing? She's splitting the atom. So that fascinates me too.
Yeah, yeah. I think that, let's see, absent any other questions, or let me just real quick see if I got everything I wanted from you. Let's see. I'm not going to talk about certain plot points because I have a tendency to give stuff away. But let's see. What do you want us to know about Roz and Charlie at the end? What do you want us to think about in that last moment?
I also don't want to entirely give it away, but I do want to say that it was very important to me that Rosalind didn't just find love, but she found herself. And so that is really, in the end, the message of the book. And I won't tell you what that entails or what decision.
Right. We have to read it to find out.
Yes, you'll have to read it to find out. Exactly. Right.
Good. Well, I want to thank you, Jennie. This was lovely, and I want to tell everybody to please. The link is in the chat to go to Acapella Books to purchase Atomic Love and Jennie's other books. So you can do that through Acapella Books in the chat link. And I'm sure that if you have any other questions, you can reach out to her or to the Atlanta History Center and they can help you.
And I
Yes.
just want to say that my website is jenniefields.com. There's a place where you can send me comments or questions, and I'm happy to answer them. You can find me on Instagram at Jennie Fields Author. I think I'm J Fields Author at Twitter, and I have a Jennie Fields Author page at Facebook. Please, look it up, follow me, be part of the story too, because I do post a lot.
Well, then I'll follow you on Instagram because I'm very Instagrammy. So we'll be, I don't want to say Instagrammies because somehow that's aged us terribly, but we will be friends on Instagram. So thank you all so much for joining us. Atomic Love is a wonderful read and a really great exploration of Roz and what she stands for and the choices she had to make. So
thank you, Jessica, I appreciate it.
Thank you so much. And we'll bring Kate back. And there you go. Here comes Kate.
Right. Thank you. Thank you both so much. As we said, Jennie's book is available from Acapella Books, but I'm sure that Parnassus Books sells it online as well if you want to support a Nashville bookseller. And Jessica's book, The Magnetic Girl, is going to be released in paperback on Tuesday. So if you've not read that yet, pick it up in paperback because it's fantastic too. So thank you both for a great conversation. And until next time, thanks everyone.
Thanks.
Bye-bye. Thank you.